France, spring 1945. The war was ending, but hunger knew no calendar. A boy stood near an American supply depot outside Reims, skinny as wire, maybe 14, maybe 12. Starvation made age impossible to read. His clothes hung like rags on a scarecrow. The sun warmed the earth after years of cold steel and smoke, but warmth couldn't fill an empty stomach. He watched soldiers unload crates, his eyes following every movement, every box that might hold food. He hadn't eaten in 3 days. Private Eddie Carson noticed him first. The kid was trying to hide behind a burned-out truck, doing a terrible job of it. The countryside around Reims looked like someone had torn pages from a storybook and set them on fire. Orchards stood bare, their branches reaching toward sky like skeletal fingers. Stone farmhouses sat hollow, windows empty as skulls. The roads were packed dirt and rubble, churned by tanks until they resembled dried riverbeds more than paths meant for human travel. Eddie Carson had been in Europe since D-Day +7. 10 months of combat, 10 months of watching boys become ghosts. Now, in April 1945, the fighting had moved east, chasing what remained of German forces toward their homeland. His unit's supply company, 29th Infantry Division, had been assigned rear echelon duty, distributing food and equipment to advancing American forces. The depot sat in what used to be a French farmer's field. Rows of supply trucks, mountains of crates, pyramids of ration boxes stacked 8 feet high. The smell of diesel mixed with spring grass. Men moved with the casual efficiency of soldiers who knew the shooting had mostly stopped, but could unquite believe it yet. Eddie was from Tennessee, a place where hunger was familiar even before the war. His daddy had worked the mines until silicosis took his lungs. His mama had stretched every meal until stretching became an art form. He knew what hunger looked like in a person's eyes, the hollow stare, the desperate calculation of distance versus risk. That's what he saw in the German kid. The boy crouched behind the truck chassis, watching. He wore what might have once been a Hitler Youth uniform, now so filthy and torn it resembled burlap more than fabric. His face was all angles, cheekbones pressing against skin like tent poles. His hands gripped the truck's frame, knuckles white, trembling. Eddie set down the crate he was carrying. Around him, other soldiers moved supplies, their voices mixing with the rumble of truck engines. Sergeant Walsh was shouting about inventory discrepancies. Someone laughed about a letter from home. The ordinary machinery of military logistics ground forward, paying no attention to one starving child at the edge of the depot. Eddie walked toward the truck, not fast, not slow. The boy saw him coming and froze, caught between running and staying. His eyes widened. They were blue, Eddie noticed. Bright blue, like Tennessee sky in summer, though the rest of him looked like winter. "Hey there, son," Eddie said, his voice soft as Sunday morning. He stopped about 10 feet away, keeping space between them. "You look hungry." The boy didn't respond. Maybe he didn't understand English. Maybe hunger had stolen his voice, along with everything else. His chest moved fast, shallow breaths, like a rabbit cornered by a dog. Eddie glanced back at the depot. Nobody was watching. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a chocolate bar, Hershey's ration bar, the kind that came in every ration pack. The brown wrapper crinkled in his hand. He held it up so the boy could see it clearly. "For you," Eddie said, gesturing to the kid, then to the chocolate. Food, Essen. He wasn't sure if that was the right German word, but the boy's eyes locked onto that chocolate bar like it was the Holy Grail. Eddie took a step forward and set the chocolate on the ground, then backed away. The boy watched him, unmoving. Eddie turned and walked back toward the supply crates, giving the kid space, giving him a choice. He didn't look back, but he listened. He heard footsteps quick, light, desperate. He heard paper tearing. He heard silence, which he knew meant the kid was eating so fast He couldn't spare breath for anything else. Private Carson continued unloading crates. The chocolate bar was gone from the ground when he glanced back. So was the boy. The next morning, the kid was back. This time he was bolder, standing at the depot's edge where the tree line met the field. Dawn light painted everything gold and red, shadows stretching long across the ground. Eddie spotted him immediately. Same ragged uniform, same skeletal frame, but standing instead of hiding. That meant something. In Eddie's experience, desperation made you hide, hope made you stand. Eddie walked over, slower than yesterday, reading the situation like his daddy taught him to read a mine shaft carefully, looking for collapse. The boy watched him approach. Eddie could see details now that he'd missed before. The kid's hair was blonde, cut short in military style, but grown shaggy from weeks without grooming. Dirt crusted his neck and hands. His boots were several sizes too large, held together with wire. "Morning," Eddie said. He pulled another chocolate bar from his pocket. He'd grabbed extras from supply. Nobody would miss them. "Bet you could use this." This time the boy didn't wait. He stepped forward, hand outstretched. Eddie placed the chocolate in his palm, felt how cold his fingers were, how the bones seemed to press through skin with no cushion of flesh between. "What's your name, son?" The boy looked at him, then down at the chocolate. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse or damage. "Klaus, Klaus," Eddie repeated. "I'm Eddie. You understand English?" The boy nodded, uncertain. "Little. School before." His accent made the words sound foreign, but comprehensible. "I haven't eaten in days." The sentence came out practiced, like he'd been rehearsing it, building courage to say it aloud. "Well, that stops today." Eddie glanced back at the depot. Still early, most men still sleeping or eating breakfast in the mess tent. "You got family, Klaus? Parents?" The boy's face did something complicated. His jaw tightened. His eyes went distant. "Dead," he said. Just that one word, flat as a gravestone. Eddie knew that flatness. Heard it in his own voice after his daddy passed. The way grief carved out your insides until you were nothing but shell, walking and breathing but empty. He'd seen that same hollowness in French civilians, in Belgian refugees, in every person touched by this war that seemed to feed on families like fuel. "I'm sorry," Eddie meant it. The war had made him tired of death, sick of loss. "Where you been staying?" Klaus pointed vaguely northeast, toward the ruins of Reims. Buildings, hiding. His English was improving already, or maybe hunger had been stealing his words, and food was getting them back. "Many children. Soldiers looking for us," Eddie understood. The end of war was complicated. German soldiers were being rounded up by thousands, sorted into POW camps. But kids, especially Hitler Youth, fell into some gray zone between combatant and civilian. Some units treated them as prisoners. Others let them scatter. Nobody seemed to know the right answer. "You need more than chocolate," Eddie said. He thought about the mess tent, about hot oatmeal and coffee, about bacon sizzling in skillets the size of truck hoods. "Wait here? Don't run." "I'll be back." He jogged to the mess tent. Sergeant Walsh was drinking coffee, reading a week-old Stars and Stripes. Eddie grabbed a tin tray, filled it with oatmeal, 2 pieces of bread, a ladle of scrambled eggs. The cook, Corporal Martinez, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Everyone was feeling generous these days. The war was ending. They'd all survived. That made men charitable. Eddie carried the tray back to the tree line. Klaus was still there, standing exactly where Eddie had left him. Trust, Eddie thought. The beginning of it, anyway. He handed Klaus the tray. The boy took it with both hands, staring at the food like it might vanish if he blinked. Then he sat down right there on the ground and started eating. Not fast, carefully, deliberately, like someone who knew eating too fast on an empty stomach meant sickness. Eddie sat down beside him. The earth was damp from morning dew, cold through his pants. They didn't talk. Klaus ate, and Eddie watched the sunrise burn away the mist rising from the field. Birds were singing somewhere in the trees. Eddie tried to remember the last time he'd noticed birds. When Klaus finished, he set the tray down and looked at Eddie. "Thank you," he said. "In Germany, they told us Americans were cruel, that you killed prisoners." "Yeah." Eddie picked at a piece of grass. "We were told Germans were monsters, that you'd kill us without thinking twice." He paused. "Guess we were both lied to." Klaus nodded slowly. His eyes were older than his age, ancient in that way only war could make them. "My father believed it. The propaganda. He said we'd win, that Germany was righteous." He swallowed hard. "He died outside Bastogne. I don't know if he still believed it then." Eddie didn't know what to say to that. How do you comfort someone whose father died for a lie? He settled for simple truth. War makes fools of us all. They sat in silence while the camp woke around them. Men emerged from tents, cigarettes dangling from lips, stretching and yawning. Truck engines coughed to life. The ordinary business of military logistics began its daily rhythm. "You can come back," Eddie said finally. "Tomorrow. I'll have food." Klaus looked at him with something Eddie couldn't quite name gratitude. Confusion. The beginning of something that might eventually become hope. "Why?" the boy asked. "I am German. Enemy. War's over, kid." "Or close enough." Eddie stood, brushed dirt from his pants. "Besides, you look like you're about 14. That ain't an enemy. That's just a child." Klaus stood too, slower, like his legs weren't quite steady yet. 15, he said, some pride entering his voice. "Almost 16. Even so," Eddie picked up the empty tray. "You come back, Klaus. Every morning if you want. We got plenty of food, and you need it more than we do." Klaus returned. Not just the next morning, but the morning after that, and the one after that. By the fourth day, he wasn't alone. 3 other children emerged from the tree line, with them 2 boys and a girl, all wearing the same ragged remains of military or youth organization uniforms. They looked like scarecrows animated by some dark magic, thin as wire, faces gaunt with hunger. The smallest boy couldn't have been more than 12. The girl was maybe Klaus's age, her blonde hair cut short, a scar running across her left cheek. Eddie met them at the edge of the depot, carrying a box of K rations. He set it down and stepped back. Klaus approached first, translating in quick German to the others. They hesitated, then moved forward like deer approaching a stream, ready to bolt at the first wrong sound. "Tell them there's enough," Eddie said to Klaus. "Tell them they're safe." Klaus translated. The children descended on the rations like starving wolves, tearing open boxes, cramming crackers and cheese into their mouths. Eddie watched, feeling something heavy settle in his chest. These were somebody's kids' German kids. Sure, but kids nonetheless. They'd been taught to hate America, raised on propaganda about American barbarism. And now here they were, starving, accepting food from the enemy because their own country had collapsed and left them with nothing. The smallest boy started crying while he ate, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face. The girl put her arm around him, whispered something in German that sounded like a lullaby or a prayer. Klaus stood apart slightly, watching Eddie, waiting to see what would happen next. "They need more than field rations," Eddie said, more to himself than Klaus. "They need real food, medical attention, a place to sleep that isn't rubble." Klaus translated this to the others. They looked at Eddie with expressions mixing hope and fear in equal measure. The smallest boy said something in German. "He asks if this is a trap," Klaus translated. "If you'll take us prisoner." Eddie thought about that. Technically, these kids were probably supposed to be processed as prisoners, or at least as displaced persons. But the bureaucracy of war's end was chaotic at best. Units were moving constantly, orders changed daily, and nobody seemed to know exactly how to handle German children orphaned by the conflict. "Tell him no," Eddie said. "Tell him I just want to help," Klaus translated. The boy nodded, but Eddie could see doubt lingering in his eyes. Trust, he thought, wasn't built in a day. These kids had been betrayed by everyone, their government, their propaganda, their circumstances. Trust would take time. Eddie started bringing extra food every morning. Not just K rations, but bread from the mess tent, fruit when they had it, sometimes bacon wrapped in paper towels, still warm and greasy. The children came earlier each day, and they started staying longer, sitting at the edge of the camp, watching American soldiers with a fascination that mixed curiosity with lingering fear. Other soldiers noticed. Sergeant Walsh pulled Eddie aside one morning, his expression somewhere between concerned and amused. "Carson, what exactly are you doing?" Walsh was from Boston, a career army man who'd seen everything from North Africa to France. His voice carried authority, but not anger. "Feeding some hungry kids, Sarge." Walsh looked at the children sitting by the tree line. Klaus was teaching the smallest boy how to throw a stick for distance, while the girl watched American soldiers unload supply trucks. "They're German," Walsh said, not accusatory, just stating fact. "They're kids," Eddie replied. "War's over." "What's it matter now?" Walsh was quiet for a long moment. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, took a long drag. "You're right," he said finally. "War's over. Or close enough." He exhaled smoke toward the brightening sky. "Keep it quiet, though. Don't make it official. Some officers might have problems with it." "Yes, Sergeant." Walsh turned to leave, then stopped. "And Carson? Good on you. World needs more of this. Less of ... He gestured vaguely eastward, toward where the fighting had been, where the death camps were being discovered, where the full scope of horror was only beginning to emerge. Less of everything else. 2 weeks passed. The children came every morning without fail, appearing from the forest like deer at dawn. They were filling out slightly, color returning to their faces, though they still carried that hollowed-out look that spoke of months without proper food. Klaus's English improved rapidly. He was bright, Eddie realized, probably had been a good student before the war consumed everything. The girl's name was Greta. The 2 younger boys were Hans and Friedrich. They were all orphans, all survivors of different tragedies. Greta's parents had died in an Allied bombing raid on Cologne. Hans's father had been killed on the Eastern Front. His mother succumbed to typhus over the winter. Friedrich simply said his family was gone, and wouldn't elaborate further. They'd banded together in the ruins of Reims, surviving on scraps and theft and pure stubborn will to live. When Klaus found Eddie's chocolate that first morning, it was the first real food any of them had eaten in 4 days. Eddie learned their stories in fragments, pieced together through Klaus's translations and brief conversations in Klaus's improving English. Each story was a small tragedy, the kind that happened 10 million times across Europe, unremarkable in its commonality, but devastating in its specificity. One morning in early May, Corporal Martinez approached Eddie at the mess tent. Martinez was from New Mexico, a cook who'd been making Army meals marginally edible since 1942. He had kind eyes and permanent grease stains on his uniform. "Those German kids you've been feeding," Martinez said, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "They still coming around?" "Every morning," Eddie said, wondering if this was trouble. "They're not causing problems, are they?" No. Martinez waved his hand dismissively. "Opposite, actually. I got too much food today. Supply convoy brought double rations by mistake, and I can't store all this before it spoils." He paused, sipped his coffee, thinking maybe those kids could help us with that problem. Eddie understood. Martinez was offering to feed them properly, officially, even if the official part stayed unofficial. "They'd appreciate that, Corporal," Bring them for lunch, Martinez said. Real meal. Mashed potatoes, beef stew, the works. Tell them it's a proper sit-down affair, not just rations handed over. Eddie found Klaus and the others at their usual spot by the tree line. They were playing a game with stones, something complicated involving tosses and points. When Eddie approached, they stopped and stood, trained like soldiers to show respect to authority even when authority wore enemy uniforms. Hey, Klaus, got a question for you. Eddie crouched down to their level, making himself smaller, less threatening. How'd you four like to have lunch in our mess tent today? Real food, proper meal, Klaus translated for the others. Their faces showed interest mixed with suspicion. Greta asked something in German, her voice sharp. She wants to know why, Klaus said. Why are you being kind to us? Eddie considered his answer carefully. Because you're hungry, he said finally. Because the war's over, and there's no point in cruelty anymore. Because you're kids, and kids deserve to eat, he paused. And because every soldier in this camp has seen too much death. Keeping you alive feels like maybe we can balance the scales just a little bit. Klaus translated this. The children exchanged looks, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Klaus nodded. We come, he said. But if it's a trap, it's not a trap, son. I give you my word. Your word. Klaus tested the phrase. In Germany, many people gave words. Not many kept them. I understand. Eddie stood up. But I'm not in Germany. And I keep my promises. At noon, Klaus led the other 3 children into the American camp. They walked slowly, staying close together, ready to run at the first sign of danger. Soldiers stopped what they were doing to watch. Not hostile, just curious about these German kids being escorted to the mess tent by Private Carson. The tent was massive, canvas stretched over metal frames, able to hold 200 men when full. At midday, it was half empty, most soldiers having already eaten. Long wooden tables stretched the tent's length, benches on either side. The smell of food hung heavy in the air. Beef stew, fresh bread, coffee, something sweet Eddie couldn't quite identify. Corporal Martinez met them at the entrance. He smiled at the children, his face warm despite the language barrier. Welcome, he said, gesturing them inside. Sit anywhere you like. Klaus translated, and they chose a table near the back, away from most soldiers, still ready to flee. Eddie sat with them, while Martinez brought plates, real plates, not tin trays piled high with food. Mashed potatoes with gravy. Beef stew thick with vegetables. Cornbread slathered with butter. Green beans that looked like they'd been canned sometime in 1943, but were food nonetheless. The children stared at the plates. Hans started crying again, silent tears that seemed to be his default response to kindness. Friedrich reached out slowly, touched the plate like he expected it to vanish. Greta looked at Eddie with something approaching awe. It's real, Eddie said. It's yours. Eat as much as you want. Klaus translated, and they ate. Not like the starving wolves they'd been 2 weeks ago, but carefully, deliberately, savoring each bite. Eddie watched them and felt something in his chest loosen, some knot of tension he'd been carrying since D-Day without realizing it. Other soldiers drifted over. Sergeant Walsh sat down across from Klaus, started asking questions through Eddie's translations. Where were they from? How old were they? What had happened to their families? The questions were gentle, curious rather than interrogatory. Walsh had grandkids back in Boston. Eddie knew. Maybe that made him softer toward children, even German ones. Private Thompson from Iowa brought a baseball from somewhere, set it on the table. Ask them if they know what this is, he said to Eddie. Klaus picked up the ball, turned it in his hands. Baseball, he said in English, the word clear despite his accent. American game. We heard about it, but never played. Well, Thompson said, grinning, that's just wrong. Every kid should know baseball. What happened next surprised Eddie. Thompson organized an impromptu game in the field beside the depot. Nothing official, just soldiers and 4 German children learning America's pastime in a muddy French field while war's end approached like distant thunder. Thompson explained the rules through Eddie's translations. Klaus caught on quickly and tried to teach the others. Friedrich was terrible at it, but laughed anyway, the first time Eddie had heard any of them laugh. Greta hit the ball on her 3rd try, a solid line drive that surprised everyone, then ran the bases with fierce determination. Hans, the smallest, was afraid of the ball at first, but Sergeant Walsh crouched down, showed him how to hold the bat, how to swing level. When Hans finally connected, the satisfying crack of ball on wood, his face lit up with pure joy. He ran to first base like his life depended on it, and the American soldiers cheered like he'd hit a home run in the World Series. They played until the sun started setting, until the spring air turned cold, until exhaustion replaced hunger as their primary sensation. The children were filthy with mud, sweaty, grinning. They looked like kids again, not starving refugees, not victims of war, just kids who'd spent an afternoon playing baseball. May turned into June. The children came every day now, no longer just for food, but for something else: community, purpose, the beginning of healing. They'd found shelter in an abandoned barn about 2 miles from camp, and American soldiers had quietly provided them with blankets, a camping stove, extra clothes. Klaus was spending hours with Eddie, learning English, asking questions about America, about Tennessee, about life before war. He was bright, Eddie kept thinking. This kid should be in school, not scavenging in ruins. One evening, as sunset painted the camp orange and gold, Klaus asked, "What will happen to us when your army leaves?" Eddie had been dreading this question. The 29th Infantry was scheduled to begin redeployment soon back to England first, and eventually home to America. The war in Europe was officially over as of May 8th, though nobody seemed to know what came next. Germany was occupied, divided, being sorted into zones of control. Displaced persons camps were filling with refugees. The machinery of peace was proving just as complicated as war had been. "I don't know," Eddie admitted. "Probably displaced persons camp, maybe an orphanage. They'll take care of you." Klaus looked at the ground. "I don't want charity," he said quietly. "I want purpose. My father taught me to work, to be useful. Now I feel useless." Eddie understood that too. His daddy had said the same thing during the Depression, when mines closed and work disappeared. A man without purpose was a man without dignity, and Eddie suspected the same held true for boys becoming men in the ruins of war. "Let me talk to Sergeant Walsh," Eddie said. "Maybe we can figure something out." Walsh listened to Eddie's proposal, smoking his perpetual cigarette, eyes narrowed in thought. "You want to make them camp helpers? Official?" "Not soldiers," Eddie clarified. "Just helpers. They could help with supply distribution, cleaning, basic labor. Give them purpose. Keep them busy while we figure out their long-term situation." Walsh was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "War's over. Rules are different now. We'll call them civilian contractors or something?" He smiled slightly. "Besides, that Klaus kid is sharper than half my soldiers. Might as well put that brain to use." The children became fixtures around camp. Klaus helped with inventory, his German precision matching army requirements perfectly. Greta worked in the mess tent with Martinez, learning to cook in industrial quantities. Hans and Friedrich helped with maintenance, cleaning, organizing, running messages between units. Soldiers adopted them informally. Thompson taught them more baseball. Walsh showed Klaus how to read military maps. Martinez taught Greta English through cooking instructions. The children soaked it up like desert earth drinking rain. But Eddie watched them carefully and saw the shadows that lingered. Friedrich still flinched at loud noises. Greta had nightmares. Martinez mentioned hearing her cry out in German during the night. Hans's laughter never quite reached his eyes. And Klaus. Klaus carried something heavy behind his improving English and quick smile. Guilt, maybe, or grief that had nowhere to go. One morning, Klaus found Eddie behind the supply depot, sitting on a crate, reading a letter from home. Klaus sat down beside him without asking permission, the way he'd started doing, comfortable now in Eddie's presence. "Can I ask you something?" Klaus said. "About the war?" "Sure, son. Do you hate us?" "Germans, I mean. After everything we did?" Eddie folded the letter carefully, buying time to think. How do you answer that? How do you separate a people from their government, soldiers from their orders, children from their parents' beliefs? "I hated what your army did," Eddie said finally. "Still do. The camps we've been hearing about, the atrocities, that's evil, Klaus. Pure evil." He paused. "But you? Hans? Greta? Friedrich? You're just kids who got caught in something bigger than any of us could control. How can I hate that?" Klaus nodded slowly. "My father believed. In the regime, in the war, in everything they told us. I believed too, for a long time." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "When I see how you treat us, with kindness, I realize how wrong we were. How wrong I was. You were a kid, Klaus. Kids believe what they're taught. But I should have known. Should have questioned." Klaus's hands clenched into fists. "How many people died because we didn't question?" Eddie didn't have an answer for that. The weight of that question was too heavy for one 15-year-old boy to carry. But Klaus was carrying it anyway, along with millions of other Germans who were waking up to the horror of what their country had done. "You can't change the past," Eddie said. "None of us can. But you can choose what kind of man you become. You can choose to be better than what you were taught." Klaus looked at him, those bright blue eyes searching Eddie's face for something forgiveness, maybe, or permission to move forward. "Thank you," he said finally. "For the food, yes, but also for treating us like human beings. For showing us that the propaganda was lies." In late June, a chaplain arrived at the camp. Captain Morrison, a Methodist minister from Ohio, who'd been assigned to provide spiritual support for occupation forces. He was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner that reminded Eddie of his mother's preacher back home. Morrison noticed the children immediately. Hard not to, they were working around camp like they belonged there, speaking a mixture of German and broken English, laughing with soldiers during breaks. Morrison watched them for 2 days before approaching Eddie. "Private Carson, might I have a word?" They walked to the edge of camp, where morning mist still clung to the ground despite the rising sun. Morrison pulled a pipe from his pocket, tamped tobacco into it methodically. "Those German children," Morrison said. "I've been observing their interactions with your men. It's quite remarkable." Eddie wasn't sure where this was going. "They're good kids, sir. They've been through hell, but they're resilient." "Indeed?" Morrison lit his pipe, smoke curling upward. "Tell me, Private, did you plan this? The integration, the informal adoption by your unit?" "No, sir. Started with just giving one hungry kid a chocolate bar. Things grew from there." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "Do you know what I think you've accomplished here, son? You've done what all the peace treaties and occupation plans and political negotiations can't do. You've shown that reconciliation is possible, that the enemy is just people, many of them innocent of their government's crimes." Eddie felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I just fed some hungry kids, sir. You did more than that." Morrison puffed his pipe, eyes distant. "I've been to displaced persons' camps, seen thousands of refugees, children orphaned by this war. Most of them are being processed through systems, sorted into categories, assigned to facilities. It's necessary, but it's mechanical, impersonal." He looked at Eddie directly. "What you've done is personal. You've treated them as individuals, not problems to be solved. That matters. What happens to them, sir, when we leave?" Morrison's expression grew sad. That's why I'm here, actually. The Army's establishing procedures for displaced children. There are orphanages being set up, foster systems being organized. These 4 will need to be processed eventually. Processed. Eddie hated that word. Like inventory. Unfortunately, yes. But ... double quotes. Morrison paused. I have some discretion in my recommendations. If I were to note in my report that these children were already integrated into a stable environment, already receiving care and education, already on a path to rehabilitation, that might buy them time. Keep them here a while longer. Eddie felt relief wash over him. That would be good, sir. They're doing well here. Learning, working, healing. And I'll make it happen. Morrison smiled. But Private, you should know this can't last forever. Eventually, they'll need permanent placement. Family, if any can be found. Adoption, perhaps. The Army's not in the business of raising German orphans. I understand, sir. But Eddie didn't understand. Not really. How do you give someone hope and then take it away? How do you build trust and then abandon it? The questions troubled him as he returned to work. July brought heat that reminded Eddie of Tennessee summers. The camp slowed during the hottest parts of day, soldiers seeking shade, work happening in early morning and evening when air was tolerable. The children adapted quickly, rising at dawn to help with breakfast, napping during midday heat, working again as sunset. Klaus found Eddie one evening near the supply depot. The boy was carrying a piece of paper, folded carefully, his expression serious. I wrote something, Klaus said. Letter to German people. He handed the paper to Eddie. Can you read it? Tell me if it's right. Eddie unfolded the paper. Klaus's handwriting was precise, almost architectural in its German neatness. The letter was in English, carefully composed, each word chosen with thought. To my countrymen, I was taught that Americans were cruel, that they would torture and kill prisoners without mercy. I believed this because I was young and trusted what I was told. I was wrong. When I was starving, an American soldier gave me food. When I was alone, American soldiers gave me friendship. When I felt worthless, they gave me work and purpose. They did not have to do these things. The war was over. They could have left us to die in the ruins we created. Instead, they showed us kindness we did not deserve. I tell you this because we must face what we have done. Our government lied to us about the war, about the enemy, about everything. We believed those lies, and millions died because of our belief. But Americans have shown me that people can be better than their propaganda, that enemies can become friends, that forgiveness is possible, even when it seems impossible. If you meet an American soldier, do not fear them. They are not the monsters we were told they were. They are just men, far from home, trying to do what's right in a world gone wrong. We lost the war, but maybe we can win the peace if we choose to learn from those we once called enemy. Klaus Weber, age 15, formerly Hitler Youth Eddie, read it twice, feeling something catch in his throat. The letter was simple, honest, powerful in its plainness. This was reconciliation in its purest form, a child admitting he was wrong, a former believer renouncing propaganda, a German reaching across the divide toward forgiveness. It's perfect, Eddie said, handing back the paper. You should share this, Klaus. People need to read it. Will they listen? Klaus's voice carried doubt. We are ashamed now. Learning what happened in the camps, what our government did. Many people don't want to think about it, don't want to face it. Maybe not everyone will listen, Eddie admitted, but some will, and those few might make all the difference. Klaus folded the letter carefully, tucked it into his pocket. Private Thompson says I should go to America someday. Learn more English, go to university. He looked at Eddie. Is that possible? For someone like me? Eddie thought about America, about his own poverty-stricken childhood, about the opportunities that existed despite the hardships. I don't know, he said honestly. Wars complicated things for everyone, but maybe. If you work hard, if you stay focused, if you find people willing to help doppelcoats, he smiled. You're smart, Klaus, smarter than most. And you're good. That counts for something. My father would hate what I've become, Klaus said quietly. He died believing in the regime. And here I am, writing letters praising American soldiers, working for the enemy. Your father loved you, Eddie said with certainty he didn't entirely feel. Maybe if he'd lived to see what you've seen, learn what you've learned, he'd feel differently. We'll never know. But Klaus, you're not betraying him by choosing to be better than what he believed. Klaus nodded, but Eddie could see the conflict in his eyes. Loyalty to the dead was powerful, maybe more powerful than loyalty to the living. Klaus was choosing his own path, but that choice came with cost. Sergeant Walsh had a camera, a Kodak Brownie, he'd carried since North Africa. He didn't use it often, said he wanted to remember the good things, not document the bad. In early August, as summer heat peaked and rumors of redeployment intensified, Walsh decided it was time to capture something good. Gather round, he called one evening after dinner. Soldiers and children assembled in front of the mess tent. Walsh positioned them carefully, soldiers in back, children in front, everyone trying to look natural while obviously posing. Klaus stood in the center, Greta beside him, Hans and Friedrich flanking them. Private Thompson put his hand on Klaus's shoulder. Martinez stood behind Greta, his expression proud like a father at graduation. Eddie positioned himself beside Klaus, and Sergeant Walsh, after setting up the camera, ran to join the group, standing at the end. Everyone say victory, Walsh called, then ran to press the camera's button. The photograph captured them there, Americans and Germans, former enemies, standing together in the golden light of a French evening. Years later, that photograph would hang in Eddie's house in Tennessee, and when his children asked about it, he would tell them this story, about a hungry boy and a chocolate bar, about how kindness could dissolve hatred, about how the end of war was just the beginning of healing. But in that moment, as the camera clicked and captured them forever, Eddie just felt grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful to have met these children. Grateful that out of so much death and destruction, something good had emerged. After the photograph, the children performed a small ceremony they'd been planning in secret. Klaus stepped forward, holding a carved wooden plaque. Friedrich had made it from a piece of barnwood, and Greta had burned words into it with a heated wire. The plaque read, "In gratitude to the soldiers of the 29th Infantry Division, who showed us that enemies can become friends. From Klaus, Greta, Hans, and Friedrich." Summer 1945. Klaus presented it to Sergeant Walsh with formal dignity. "For your kindness," he said in carefully practiced English. "For saving our lives. For teaching us that propaganda was lies." Walsh took the plaque, and Eddie saw the tough Boston sergeant's eyes grow suspiciously bright. "You kids," Walsh said, his voice rough, "you didn't need saving. You saved yourselves by having the courage to trust us." They hung the plaque in the mess tent, where it remained until the unit redeployed. Eddie wondered what happened to it after that, probably lost in the chaos of military logistics. One small piece of wood among millions of items being sorted and shipped and abandoned across a continent. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. The war, all of it, both theaters, every front, was finally truly over. Camp erupted in celebration. Soldiers fired rifles in the air, danced, drank whatever alcohol they could scrounge, laughed and cried and sang songs about home. The children watched this celebration with mixed emotions. They were glad the killing had stopped, but they understood what it meant. The war's end meant redeployment, reorganization, the dissolution of temporary structures, like their arrangement at the camp. 3 days later, orders came down. The 29th Infantry Division was being redeployed to England, then demobilized. Supply operations in France were being transferred to different units. Everyone had 2 weeks to prepare for movement. Eddie found Klaus behind the supply depot, sitting on the same crate where they'd first talked about Klaus's letter. The boy was staring at the horizon, where sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. "You heard," Eddie said. Not a question. Klaus's voice was flat. "Captain Morrison came to tell us. We're being transferred to a displaced persons camp near Frankfurt. Orphanage, eventually." He paused. "He said we were lucky. That many children have worse situations. It's not bad, Klaus. They'll take care of you, help you find a future." "I know." Klaus turned to look at Eddie, and there were tears on his face, though his voice remained steady. "But this place, you people ... you saved us. Not just from hunger, but from hatred. You showed us a different way to be." His English had improved so much over these months that the words came easily now. "How do we say goodbye to that?" Eddie sat down beside him. The metal crate was warm from the day's heat, holding on to sunlight like memory. "You don't," he said. "You carry it with you. You remember what you learned here. And when you meet someone who needs help, someone who's lost or hungry or broken, you give them what we gave you? Kindness, purpose, hope. Will I see you again?" Klaus asked. "When you go back to America?" Eddie wanted to say yes, wanted to promise they'd stay in contact, that he'd check on Klaus, that they'd meet again someday. But he'd seen too much war to make promises he couldn't keep. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The world's a big place, and we're just 2 people in it. But Klaus, I'll never forget you. Any of you. What happened here, it matters. It changed me." "Yes." Klaus wiped his eyes. "In Germany, we have a saying. Dankbarkeit ist das Gedächtnis des Herzens. Gratitude is the memory of the heart." He looked at Eddie. "My heart will remember this always." They sat in silence as the sun set completely and darkness claimed the camp. Lights flickered on intense. Someone was playing a harmonica, the melody drifting across the cooling air. It was a song Eddie didn't recognize, something French or maybe Belgian, sad and beautiful. "I'm going to university someday," Klaus said suddenly. "I'll study history. I'll write about this, about what happened when enemies stopped being enemies. About how the end of war is just the beginning of something else." "You'll make a fine historian," Eddie said. "You've lived through history. That gives you perspective others won't have." "And you?" Klaus asked. "What will you do? In Tennessee?" Eddie thought about home, about his mother waiting, about the mountains he hadn't seen in 2 years, about a life he'd left behind that was waiting to be picked up again. Go back to school, maybe. Work. Leave. He smiled. Maybe have kids someday. "And if I do, I'll tell them about you. About the German boy who taught me that the best part of winning a war is showing mercy after it has over." Tennessee, 1975. Eddie Carson was 48 years old, working as a teacher at the high school he'd once attended. His hair was graying at the temples. He had a wife, 2 children, a house with a porch that looked out over the valley where morning mist gathered like memories. The letter arrived in May, postmarked from Munich, Germany. Eddie recognized the handwriting immediately, even though it had been decades since he'd seen it. Precise, architectural, unmistakably Klaus. "Dear Eddie, I hope this letter finds you well. I obtained your address through military archives and hope you don't mind my reaching out after so many years. I wanted you to know that I did go to university, as I said I would. I studied history, earned my doctorate, and now teach at Ludwig Maximilian University. I've written extensively about post-war reconciliation, about the psychological effects of occupation, about how former enemies become allies. But more importantly, I wanted to tell you that I well lived my life according to what you taught me in that summer of 1945. Married a wonderful woman, her name is Elizabeth. She was also orphaned by the war. We have 3 children, and I've taught them about kindness, about questioning propaganda, about the importance of seeing humanity in everyone. I found Greta, Hans, and Friedrich over the years. We stayed in contact. Greta became a nurse, dedicated to healing. Hans works with refugees, helping displaced children find homes. Friedrich is a teacher, like you. We all chose professions that allow us to give others what you gave us hope. We sometimes talk about that summer, about the American soldiers who showed us mercy when they didn't have to, about how your kindness defeated propaganda more effectively than any bomb or bullet ever could. I don't know if you remember me. Perhaps I'm just one of many people whose lives you touched during the war, but I wanted you to know that the chocolate bar you gave a starving boy didn't just save his life. It changed it completely. You showed me that enemies are just people who haven't met yet, that forgiveness is possible even when it seems impossible, that the true victory of war is choosing mercy over revenge. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for feeding me when I was hungry. Thank you for treating me like a human being when I'd been taught to hate you. Thank you for showing me a different way to live. With deep gratitude and enduring friendship, Klaus Weber, Ph.D., Professor of Modern History, Munich, Germany. Eddie read the letter 3 times, sitting on his porch as Tennessee morning turned to afternoon. His wife found him there, tears on his face, smiling. "Good news?" she asked. "The best news," Eddie said. A reminder that good things last longer than bad things. That kindness echoes through time. He handed her the letter. That maybe we did more than just win a war. Maybe we won the peace. That evening, Eddie sat down at his desk and wrote a reply. He told Klaus about his life, about teaching history to Tennessee teenagers who'd never known war, about his children growing up in peace that his generation had bought with blood and sacrifice. He told Klaus that he remembered everything: the chocolate bar, the baseball game, the letter Klaus had written, the wooden plaque, that last evening watching sunset together. He told Klaus that those memories were among his most precious, proof that even in humanity's darkest moments, light could find a way through. He ended the letter with words Klaus had spoken 3 decades earlier. Gratitude is the memory of the heart. My heart remembers always. 2 lives, touching briefly in the chaos of war's end, connected by a simple act of kindness that rippled forward through decades. A chocolate bar became a meal, became a friendship, became a lesson, became a life philosophy, became an inheritance passed to children and students, and everyone either man encountered. This is how wars truly end, not with treaties or surrenders or victory parades, but with individual choices to be kind when cruelty would be easier, to forgive when hatred would be justified, to see humanity in the enemy, and in seeing it, to dissolve the very concept of enemy altogether. In a field in France in 1945, a hungry German boy said he hadn't eaten in days, and an American soldier gave him food. Everything that followed, the healing, the reconciliation, the friendship, the lessons passed forward through generations, all of it started there, with chocolate, with mercy, with the simple recognition that a hungry child is just a hungry child, regardless of which flag flew over his birthplace. The war ended with bombs and surrenders and celebrations. But peace began with a candy bar shared between enemies who discovered they were just 2 human beings trying to survive in a world gone mad. That's the real story. That's the victory that matters. That's what echoes through time, long after the battlefields grow quiet and the soldiers go home, and the monuments are built, and the history books are written. 1 act of kindness. 1 choice to be human in an inhuman situation. 1 moment when the propaganda dissolved and 2 people saw each other clearly for the first time. That's how you win a war's aftermath. That's how you build a peace. That's how you change the world, 1 chocolate bar, 1 meal, 1 friendship at a time.